In tonight's story, we visit the serene countryside of England during the Regency era, a time abundant with elegance and romance. We'll hear how an unexpected encounter between a duke and a woman from New York leads to love. I'm your narrator, Laura Risotto, and this is The Duke and the Woman from New York by Gillian Rogerson. On a bright morning in April 1814, Mabel Williamson opened the bedroom window of the cottage and gazed out at the beautiful landscape of Fellenby, a county that nestled in the heart of the English countryside. Early morning rays of sunshine flowed smoothly over the grass, causing dewdrops to sparkle like diamonds. Birds sang from the branches of nearby trees, and tulips blossomed in the flower beds beneath her window. Mabel felt like she had stepped into one of the oil paintings she'd seen in museums. The pleasing panorama was a far cry from the hustle and bustle of New York, the place she called home, and although she loved it dearly, the peace and quiet of her new surroundings was a most welcome experience. Mabel took a deep, refreshing inhale of the clear morning air and slowly let it out. It was the perfect day for a horse ride through the picturesque countryside. She was staying at the cottage with her parents and 3 sisters. They had arrived after a long overseas journey the previous evening and had been greeted by the friendly owners of the cottage. The owners told the family that during their stay, they had full use of the horses in the adjoining stables. Mabel moved away from the window and tipped her head. She listened to the noises in the cottage. She heard the gentle snores coming from her mother and sisters in the nearby bedrooms, and the not-so-gentle snores coming from her father. The trip from New York had been a long one, and her family were still taking their rest. Mabel was too curious to stay inside and felt an undeniable impulse to explore the countryside. She left a note on her pillow to explain her absence and then quickly dressed and headed to the stables. A young boy dressed in farm clothes was cleaning out the stables. When he saw Mabel, a look of confusion crossed his face. He bowed and said, "Morning, Miss Williamson. Can I help you with something? Do you need the owners? I can run across the field and get them for you." He bowed again. Mabel wasn't sure if she should return the bow. During the sea journey to England, her mother had tried to explain the finer details of English etiquette and how a certain behavior would be expected of them all. There seemed an inordinate amount of bowing involved, and one of Mabel's sisters had said it sounded too ridiculous and they couldn't possibly remember everything. Mabel had only been half listening because she'd been too absorbed in looking at the vast expanse of ocean ahead of them and wondering what adventures waited in England. As she looked at the eager farm boy that morning, she wished she had paid more attention to her mother's conversation. Mabel didn't want to appear disrespectful, so she bowed to the boy. Her movement caused the boy to break into a cheeky grin. He said she didn't have to do that to him. Mabel smiled and shook her head in confusion. She confided she didn't know all the rules of society yet, but was hoping that would change as the days progressed. The boy nodded in understanding and asked again how he could help. Mabel expressed her desire to go out riding and requested help getting a suitable horse ready. The boy led her further into the stables, and they stopped in front of a beautiful dapple-grayed horse who neighed lightly when he saw Mabel. She moved closer and let the horse nuzzle into her neck. She told the boy the horse would be perfect for her. As a keen horsewoman, Mabel was more than capable of preparing the horse herself, but the young boy was keen to help and brought out a polished leather saddle. Mabel was bewildered when she saw the shape of the saddle and asked what was wrong with it. "What do you mean, miss?" the boy replied. "It's so you can ride side saddle. It's what all the ladies use." Mabel knew she was expected to ride side saddle in England, but it wasn't something she knew how to do yet. And on that fine morning in April, she didn't want to waste any precious time learning how to acquire that particular new skill. To the boy's astonishment, Mabel asked for a normal saddle to be used instead. Her comments caused the boy to fall silent, but he produced a regular saddle and helped Mabel to secure it onto the horse. He was still quiet as she jauntily rode away. He waved goodbye to the peculiar lady from New York. The horse trotted at the sedate pace along the track that led away from the cottage. It felt good to be on a horse again, and a soft smile settled on Mabel's face as she made her way along the peaceful country lane. The countryside opened up, and Mabel increased her pace. The horse seemed delighted to be going faster, and before long, the two of them were racing across the wide, green fields. A thought occurred to Mabel about her expected behavior, and she wondered if ladies were supposed to go at a slower pace when out riding. But how could she resist the feeling of freedom that racing through the land on horseback brought her? The wind through her hair, the warm sun on her face, and the never-ending countryside ahead of her. She carried on and let the wonderful feeling of liberation flow through her. As she continued riding, another thought occurred to Mabel. On the journey to England, she vaguely recalled her mother saying something about a duke who lived nearby. What was his name again? She couldn't remember, but she did recall her mother's stern expression as she told her daughters that under no circumstances should they trespass on the Duke's land. Mabel dismissed the concern from her mind. Hadn't her mother said the Duke lived miles away? She must be far enough away from his land, surely. Reassured, she carried on riding across the fields. Something caught her eye on the horizon, or rather, someone caught her eye. A man on horseback was waving to her. Mabel thought it was someone from a nearby village, so she waved back and continued on her way. There was a low hedge coming up, and Mabel thought it the perfect height to jump over. She rode faster towards it. To her dismay, upon nearing the hedge, her horse came to an abrupt stop, whereupon Mabel was catapulted through the air. She came to a surprising yet soft landing on the other side of the hedge. The landing was soft because she'd landed in a large patch of mud. The man who'd waved to her earlier rode quickly over to her side and jumped off his horse. He knelt at her side. His face was full of concern, and he was unaware the back of his riding jacket was trailing in the mud. Despite her ungainly position, Mabel noticed how handsome the stranger was. His dark hair flopped attractively over his brown eyes, and his riding clothes showed years of wear, which most likely confirmed he was an enthusiastic horseman. The man asked if she was hurt. When Mabel shook her head, he held his hands out and helped her to her feet. His hands were warm and pleasantly rough from years of manual labor. Perhaps he was a skilled tradesman who lived in one of the villages. She wondered if he was married. Mabel became so lost in her imaginings that she forgot to answer the handsome man's queries, and so he asked his questions again. Mabel blushed slightly and confirmed she was unhurt, but felt extremely foolish. Upon hearing her accent, the man broke into a wide smile, which only added to his attractiveness. He pushed his hair back off his forehead, but it immediately flopped forward again. The man asked where she was from and what was her reason for visiting the Fellenby estate. Mabel's eyes widened, and she said, "Am I on the Fellenby estate?" The man nodded. Mabel shook her head in consternation as her mother's words came back to her clearly. "But this land belongs to Duke somebody or other, doesn't it?" "I don't think he takes kindly to trespassers. Please, tell me the quickest route out of here. I don't want to get caught, and I certainly don't want the Duke to take legal actions against me. My mother would be mortified." The man assured her that even if the Duke did catch her on his property, He wouldn't take any legal actions. He hesitated a little and then said the Duke was considered to be a kind man. Oh, Mabel said. Do you know the Duke? I am familiar with him, the man replied. I'm Sam. I didn't catch your name. Mabel introduced herself and then answered Sam's earlier questions. She explained she had traveled to that part of England with her family because her grandparents had lived in the country in their younger days. They had met each other during a local dance. They had soon married, and after hearing tales about New York from a traveler, they decided to leave England behind, and they set off on a new and exciting adventure overseas. And whilst her grandparents adored New York, they still thought fondly of England and wanted their family to see where they had grown up. Mabel held her arms out and said, So here we are. Well, only me at present because my family is still sleeping. Sam smiled as he listened and asked more questions about her visit and what she thought of England so far. Mabel laughed and said, I haven't seen much of it yet, but I must confess, I am somewhat confused about how many times I should bow when I meet people. And who should I bow to? Also, there is the perplexing matter of titles. My mother tried to explain the difference between a duke and a marquis, but I'm afraid her words left me feeling more confused than enlightened. Sam smiled at her words. Mabel continued talking. Mother told me about the magnificent balls that are held in country houses and how she would love to attend one. I can't see how that could ever happen to a simple family from New York. Sam took a clean handkerchief from his inside pocket and handed it to Mabel. He told her there was a speck of mud on the tip of her nose. Mabel blushed again and said he should have told her that sooner, because now she felt even more foolish for chattering on whilst having mud all over her face. Sam put his hand on his chest, gave her a mock look of hurt, and agreed that yes, he should have told her sooner. But it was only a speck and was no bigger than the becoming freckles on her face. With a sincere apology, he bowed and said he hoped Mabel would find it in her heart to forgive him. Mabel laughed and said she hadn't meant to be harsh with him. She often spoke without thinking, and her mother said she was too impetuous and let her heart rule her head far too easily. Mabel swiftly wiped the tip of her nose clean. Sam said impulsiveness was an excellent quality, and a person should act on what their heart tells them more often. They walked over to their respective horses and conversed some more. Sam asked many thoughtful questions about Mabel, including how she planned to spend the rest of her time in England. Mabel said her family didn't have definite plans and were taking it one day at a time. With a smile, she said, "I think my mother is secretly hoping to receive an invitation to a ball." Sam gave her a long look and said he could help with that if Mabel would allow him to. Intrigued, Mabel asked him to explain. Sam said there was a ball to be held at Fellenby House that very evening. The Duke most likely already knew Mabel, and her family were residing nearby. And as he loved meeting new people, he would be sure to extend an invitation to Mabel and her family. If Mabel was in agreement, Sam could ensure an invitation was extended for that evening's ball. Mabel's mouth dropped open. She quickly closed it and stared at Sam. When she found her voice, she said it was a wonderful gesture. But how would it work? They didn't have the right clothes to wear or a carriage to get them there. And she still didn't know when to bow and whom she should bow to. She put a hand to her forehead and proclaimed, "There will be dancing. Don't those dances include many complicated moves? I can't do complicated moves. I have tried many simple dances over the years, but I have fallen over so many times that I've given up attempting to dance. Thank you, Sam, for this generous offer, but it wouldn't work out for so many reasons." Sam's eyes twinkled, and he asked Mabel if that was her heart talking or her head. Mabel smiled and said of course it was her head, her very sensible head. A faraway look came into her eyes. "But imagine if we could go to the ball. My mother would be overjoyed." "And what about you, Mabel? How would you feel?" Sam's voice was soft and warm. Mabel looked into his eyes again. She was finding it increasingly impossible to look away. She asked if he would be at the ball. "I will, and I would love it if you and your family could be there too. As for the clothes and the carriage, those can easily be arranged. Regarding the dancing and bowing, I can show you what to do. Shall we start with the dancing right here and now?" He bowed and held his hand out to her. Mabel was unable to resist. She put her hand in his and smiled up at him. He led her away from the horses and began to instruct her in dancing. He told Mabel some of the names of the dances, which she promptly forgot because she was too busy listening to his instructions and watching where her feet were going. She was also concentrating on not gazing too often into his dark eyes. And in addition to that, she was trying hard to ignore how natural it felt to be dancing with this charismatic man. A man she hadn't known less than an hour ago. Mabel could not deny how natural it felt to be dancing with him. Mabel and Sam danced easily across the grass for the next hour or so. Their horses grazed on tufts of grass and watched the couple with a small amount of interest. The happy couple glided easily across the grass, lost in the silent rhythm of the dance and the rhythm of their matching heartbeats. After a while, Sam brought the dancing to an end and said with regret he had to take his leave because he had work to do. He took the details of where Mabel was staying and said he would organize everything that was needed for the ball, including a carriage. He bowed to her, and when he met her eyes, he held her gaze for more than was polite. Mabel couldn't look away from him and knew there was something special between them. She would count the minutes until they were together again. Sam climbed onto his horse, bowed once more, and went on his way. Mabel watched him as he rode across the field and disappeared over the horizon. Her thoughts were all of a muddle. This man had appeared so unexpectedly and had completely stolen her affections. Not only was he going to arrange for her family to attend a ball that evening at the Duke's house, but he had also achieved the impossible and taught her how to dance. And none of this would have happened if she hadn't acted on her impulses that morning and taken a horse ride through the countryside. Mabel shook her head to clear her thoughts. She had a lot to do, and it would start with informing her dear mother about the upcoming ball. Her mother took the news extremely well, as though she knew such a thing would happen one day. Her mother remained calm even when uninformed staff from the Duke's house knocked on the cottage door later with armfuls of evening clothes. She wasn't at all surprised when other members of his staff appeared and helped the Williamson family get ready for the ball, an activity which included arranging the women's hair into the most elaborate of styles, complete with feathers and pearls. When the horse-drawn carriage arrived hours later, Mabel's mother stepped into the polished wood vehicle as though it was something she did every day of her life. Her daughters clad in elegant silk dresses, followed her. Mabel's father was the last one to enter the carriage. He looked resplendent in his evening suit, high-collared shirt, and velvet waistcoat. Once the carriage was on its way to the Duke's house, Mabel's sister asked her again about her meeting with Sam. Mabel had already repeated the tale a dozen times, but didn't mind telling them once more because she was already constantly replaying the wonderful event in her mind. She didn't need to tell her sisters how she felt about Sam, as they could clearly hear it in her voice. The carriage headed along the country road, and the sky grew darker. Soon, the vehicle turned left onto an impressive gravel drive that led to an elegant, cream-colored building. Mabel's mother nodded and said it was exactly what she was expecting. She placed her gloved hand over Mabel's and said it was going to be an enchanting evening for everyone, but especially so for Mabel. She added that a mother knows such things. The carriage stopped outside the open door of the impressive building. Uniformed men stepped lightly forward and helped everyone out of the carriage. A man appeared in the doorway. It was Sam. Mabel's heart missed a beat. He was even more handsome than she remembered. He was wearing the finest of evening suits, and his unruly hair was now under control and lay in perfect waves on his head. His gaze alighted on Mabel, and he smiled softly. He moved towards her and bowed. Mabel bowed back. It seemed the right thing to do. She was vaguely aware of her family watching their every movement, but she didn't take her eyes off Sam. Sam crooked his elbow towards her. Mabel put her hand on his arm. He leaned closer and said he had something to confess, but he couldn't let the evening continue until he explained and gained her forgiveness. Mabel had a feeling she already knew what he was going to say. They walked away from the gathering of guests. Looking over her shoulder, Mabel smiled at her waiting family and subtly motioned for them to go inside. Sam and Mabel walked across the stone patio. Mabel admired the sweeping gardens that lay before them. Sam cleared his throat, but before he could speak, Mabel turned to him and said, "You're the Duke, aren't you? His Grace, Samuel Fellamby." Her smile was as tender as the look in her eyes. "How did you know?" he asked. Mabel said she had worked it out and assumed he hadn't told her of his real identity because he wanted to be treated as a normal man and not a member of the nobility. Sam lowered his eyes and said Mabel was correct. People acted differently when they discovered who he was. But when he had first laid eyes upon Mabel, he knew she was different, and he wanted her to get to know the real him. He raised his eyes and said, "I apologize for misleading you. It was done with good intentions." Mabel said it was only when the boy at the stables began chatting when she returned to the cottage that she realized who Sam really was. The boy explained how Duke Fellenby helped the villagers with any repairs needed to their homes and land, and would often turn up to their houses in a well-worn riding jacket with his tools ready to get to work. Added to the fact that Sam had arranged for Mabel and her family to attend the ball confirmed her suspicions. Sam smiled softly. "Am I forgiven, Mabel? I acted on my impulses when I saw you." Mabel said there was nothing to forgive. She looked into his eyes, and even though she knew it wasn't the proper way to do things, she asked him to dance with her. She added a vow for good measure. The Duke said he would be delighted. Together, the Duke and the woman from New York danced across the stone patio. They joined the guests inside his home, and the couple danced into early hours of the morning. Before they parted, they agreed to meet up again the next day. Mabel's mother was right about the night being an enchanting one for Mabel. It was one she would never forget, and it led to her staying in England and marrying the handsome Duke of Fellenby.